If you were here last night, it was a special night with Father John Fuchs, his gentle guidance in the life of Christ, and then the Living Rosary with some of our fifth graders, which was so beautifully done, touching, as you listen to these children walk through the luminous mysteries, the mysteries of Jesus' life, from his baptism through the Last Supper and the institution of the Eucharist. Tonight, we focus in on Jesus' suffering and death, which is in some ways the very heart of God's grace breaking through. So once again, we begin with our theme song. It's on the back of the programs that you received. Again, I'll turn off my microphone and just sing along with you. One more time, to be still. Be still. So Jesus became flesh to remind us that God has always walked with us, never abandoned us. Our original sin never stops the original grace of God. It does not have the power to do that. So when Christ becomes flesh in our world, he becomes flesh completely. He enters into our experience fully. I don't know if you've noticed when the water is poured into the wine in the chalice, the prayer that is said, by the mystery of this water and wine, may we come to share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity. So the idea of Christ becoming flesh, the divine becomes human so that the human can become divine. And he touches every single aspect of our humanity. In a sense, it's kind of like a cosmic, divine, heavenly game of tag. And he's it. And he wants all of us to be it as well. And so he doesn't come in as a shadow. He doesn't come in as a ghost. He doesn't come in as a spirit. God enters into flesh to tag us so that we can all be it. We can all be divine. So I want us to take a moment to remember a little bit of the most kind of fleshy part of Jesus' life. The life that redeems us from sin, that breaks the power of sin. Jesus' paschal mystery, his suffering and his death. Now at Easter we'll remember the resurrection and ascension. But for now, the fleshiness of Jesus' very passion and death. So we're going to walk through it step by step to understand what Jesus did for us. And I want to go back to the Passover because we look at this moment, this paschal mystery, as the new Passover. So what was it that Jesus was celebrating on Holy Thursday? The Passover meal. He was celebrating the Exodus, the event that led the people from their slavery in Egypt to their freedom and their journey to the Promised Land. Now, if you remember in the Exodus, the people were trapped in Egypt, and the Egyptians didn't want to let them go. So Moses visited upon the people 10 plagues. So in Jesus, instead of the people getting those 10 plagues, Jesus took on the 10 plagues. And we're going to listen to that and how that works. So does anybody remember what the first plague was with the Egyptians? What was the first plague? The river Nile becoming blood. That was the first plague. The Nile becomes blood. Now, if you remember, Jesus was in the Garden of Gethsemane. And in the Garden of Gethsemane, as he's praying, what happens to his sweat? It becomes blood. So his first plague is that plague of fear, and in the darkness of the garden, he is filled with that fear, and yet what does he say? Your will, not my will, be done. So Jesus in the garden is the opposite of Adam and Eve in the garden. In the Garden of Eden, whose will did they follow? Their own. In the Garden of Gethsemane, Jesus accepts God's will. So Jesus takes on his shoulders the first plague, the plague of fear. How many of us have been afraid? Yeah, we've all been there. We've all been afraid. So Jesus walks with us in our fear. Now, the second plague in Egypt was the frogs, which I think is an interesting plague. As you know, frogs make a lot of noise. But as soon as danger comes, they're silent and they hop away. Jesus' second plague in the Garden of Gethsemane was being abandoned by his followers. They were so loud, saying, "Yes, we will follow you wherever you lead. We will give up everything to follow you." But when push came to shove, they gave up everything to get away from him. In the Gospel of Mark, there's a man who even removes his own clothing to get away. They'll give up anything to get away. Now, the third plague is lice. Lice gets under your skin. Lice gets in your hair. Lice gets close to you and gets attached to you. The third plague for Jesus was being betrayed by one of his closest followers, Judas, who betrays him with a kiss. Judas clung to him, embraced him, and handed him over to the authorities. So Jesus has not only felt fear, he's not only felt abandonment, but now he feels betrayal. 3 plagues on his shoulders already. If you've ever felt abandoned, if you've ever felt betrayed, especially by your family or friends, Jesus has been there and he's done that. The next plague is the flies. For Jesus, he is surrounded by people who buzz around him with false accusations. He did this, he did that. They alight on him for a moment and then they buzz away. They're buzzing in his ears with false statements against him. and he stands accused. If you've ever been accused of something you didn't do, Jesus has been there. He's experienced that. He knows how it feels. The next plague on the Egyptians were the diseased cattle, the disease killing them, eating away at these cattle, at this livestock. For Jesus, out in the courtyard is Peter, and the disease of doubt begins to eat away at Peter, who denies him 3 times. Peter, who promises to be strong, is undone by a servant girl. I tell you, I do not even know the man. If you've ever been denied by people who say they love you and then turn away, Jesus knows what that feels like. He's been there. He's done that. The next plague on the Egyptians are boils. For Jesus, those wounds on his body from the scourging that he took welt up on his back. And the physical pain that he felt, he didn't put upon another, like the Egyptians felt on their bodies. Jesus took it on himself. So for all of us sitting here today who have felt the pain of wounds or illness or broken bones, broken bodies, Jesus has felt that physical pain as well. The next plague was hail that fell upon them. The Egyptians were bombarded by this hail. Jesus felt upon his back and shoulders the weight of the cross, a burden that he should not have had to bear, and yet he bore it in absolute love for us. The weight on his shoulders, which put him onto the ground in the stations of the cross 3 times, he bore willingly and lovingly. If you've ever had to carry a burden that's been so heavy it was breaking you, caring for an elderly parent, a beloved spouse, bearing the weight of the loss of a child, Jesus knows that weight. He's borne that weight. He's carried it on his shoulder. For the Egyptians, the next plague, locusts. And the locusts ate away at the crops, devouring them. For Jesus, at his crucifixion, he was surrounded by people who mocked him, who made fun of him. Come down if you are the Son of God. He was ridiculed despite the love that he had in his heart. Whenever you've been bullied or ridiculed, Christ knows what it feels like. He's been there. He's done that. Those same people who welcomed him on Palm Sunday cried out for his crucifixion and stood at the cross making fun of him. He knows how it feels. The next plague that the Egyptians felt was darkness, and in that darkness they felt despair. If you remember at Jesus' crucifixion, darkness covered for 3 hours the scene of Jesus' crucifixion. And the darkness that was around him had a chance to eat away at him. And in the darkness he cried out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" Despair began to attack his heart, and yet love held him in place. If you've ever been in the darkness of despair, Jesus has been there. He's done that. He knows what it feels like, and he walks with us in the midst of our own darkness, in the midst of our own despair. And of course, what was the final plague that was hoisted upon the people of Egypt? The death of the firstborn. Jesus Christ, the firstborn, the only Son of God. Rather than taking the blood of a lamb, the Lamb of God shed his blood for us. Rather than marking a door, his blood marks the cross, which is our door to heaven. And as he died on the cross, he forgave the people who put him there. And in that forgiveness, he shows us that there is no sin so great that God cannot forgive. A thief on the cross, just out of reach of Jesus' hand, was still able to reach out and grasp salvation, as Jesus said, "You will be with me in paradise." This man who was literally being dismembered on that cross, Christ remembers. Jesus' passion and death give us three huge lessons that we should never forget. The first lesson is this: that God is with us in the midst of our struggles. When we are on the cross, when we're in darkness, when we are surrounded by people who mock us, when we're weighed down by heavy burdens, when we are falsely accused, betrayed, abandoned, and denied, God is with us, Emmanuel. We are never alone, and especially in our toughest times, God is there with us. That's the first lesson. The second lesson is this: that God has the courage to be with us and forgive us for whatever sins we have ever or ever will commit. If God can forgive the cross, God can forgive anything. There's nothing that could push him out of our lives. And the most important lesson for us in all things is God's love. God's love, beginning and end. Original grace, which created us. Original grace that walked with us. Original grace that allowed us as human beings to be naked before God. God on the cross is naked before us. God's love is so intense that he would remove all barriers. His love would open its arms on the cross to embrace the entire world. God's love is unending and unbreakable. Full circle we come to that original grace, that in the midst of darkness and despair, in the midst of pain and sorrow, and even in the midst of death, original grace remains. That's a blessing. That's a true blessing. Now, how does this work in our lives, in our daily lives? Laura Dougherty is going to talk about the experience of pain and sorrow and loss and death and all of that. She's going to just touch on one story or two.
Evening. So in a little while tonight, we're going to pray the Stations of the Cross. And I have a hard time thinking of a devotion that is quite as powerful as this particular devotion is for us. It's been known to bring me to tears on more than one occasion. And we will listen, astounded, as Pilate condemns Jesus to death, although we know that he's done absolutely nothing wrong. And we will watch, amazed, at the strength of our Lord as he bends down and picks up that cross and continues that long journey, battered and beaten. We'll cringe each time he falls, longing to bend over and pick that cross up and help him up. We'll observe with sadness as he meets his mother, grieving and sorrowful. And our hearts will break as he's finally nailed to that cross. And we will stand in awe as he accepts his fate and cries out, "Father, forgive them, for they do not know what they are doing." The Passion of Jesus is not for the faint of heart at all. It's a hard story to hear. But the story of the last moments of Jesus' time here with us demonstrates that fundamental understanding that comes with our faith, that Jesus loves us enough, so much, that he would choose to suffer that passion for us, to free us from our sin so that we can turn around and love him back. And I really think that's the key. His love was given freely. We didn't deserve it. We didn't do anything to earn it. We didn't ask for it. It's just given to us as a gift. But when we turn around and accept the love and decide to love him back, I really think that's when our lives begin to have meaning. And that's when we figure out that we're not alone. This life is not for the faint of heart either. I think we can all agree. We have many ups and we have many downs. And it's really easy to feel God's presence in those joys. A little bit more difficult when our own crosses are so heavy. But Deacon Bill reminds us about how Jesus walks with us even now. And he's right, isn't he? He is absolutely right. And we all know it in our hearts. But sometimes it's hard to believe it up here in our heads. When we're experiencing something, when we're going through grief and fear and anger, while we navigate through this uncertain life, has there ever been a time when you have wondered, why God? Why me? Where are you? I think it's safe to say we've probably all been there, even if it was for just a split second. A little over a year ago, I was finding myself more and more unhappy in my job, feeling less and less valued and less satisfied. I would come home crabby, frustrated, and empty. My husband, DJ, had told me to quit for years, but it was a job that afforded me a certain amount of flexibility, allowing me to raise my own children, to be able to be present to them. And nothing else mattered quite as much as that did for me. And it was a paycheck. There are a lot of people out there who would do anything just for a paycheck. And as some of you know, we have 2 boys in private school, headed off to college soon. So the idea of losing that second income made me very, very nervous. It was security for me. But after one particularly bad day, DJ said to me, "You're done. Quit today." And his response to my litany of reasons not to quit was always, "We'll be fine. We always are. God has always taken care of us." And I knew he was right in my heart. It was my head that struggled with it. It was my pride, my fear, my need to have control, which is one of my character flaws. You can ask Joe. So finally I did what I hadn't been doing. I turned to God and I prayed. Why I hadn't been praying up about that decision up until that point, I couldn't tell you. Seems I'm always asking God for help for something. But for this, I had decided apparently to just handle it all on my own, which might be why it took 18 years. In that prayer, I heard the answer clearly. There is something more. There is something different. There is something better. Now, true to form, God did not give me all the answers right then and there. And I didn't know what that more and better and different might be. But it was enough to help me to make the decision to walk away. So the next morning, woke up, told DJ, "Okay, last chance. Tell me now not to do it because I'm going to quit today." His reply was a simple "good. It's about time," probably is more what he said. So I went in, finished up all my tasks, packed up my things, walked into my boss's office, and politely said, "Today's my last day." The minute those words came out of my mouth, I knew I had made the right decision. I left my job of 18 years, and I never looked back. But now the hunt for employment was on. I had no idea what I wanted to do, but I did know what I didn't want. I didn't want just another job. I wanted to be able to go home at night and say, "Today I did something for Jesus. Today I made a difference in this world." So most of you know the end of that story. That decision ended up with my employment here at St. Pat's, for which I'm eternally grateful. But it wasn't an easy journey. Now, there are many heavier stories out there than this one. There are many challenges and trials that people go through that are much bigger and more difficult than this example. But it was a bit of a dark time for me. And I felt very alone and sad and scared and all of those emotions that can get us wrapped up. But as I look back now, in hindsight, I can see that Jesus was walking with me from the beginning. And not just from the beginning of that job hunt, but from the beginning of my life. He walked with me by giving me grandparents who taught me from the day I was born that God loved me, always would, and would always take care of me. He walked with me by giving me a supportive, faith-filled, loving husband who wants my happiness even more than I do. He walked with me by giving me 2 amazing children who gave my life meaning in a way I never knew it could. And he walked with me by placing in my life strong, true, and loyal friends and family who without my life would be so different. And he carried me through some incredibly difficult times that taught me the value of being grateful for the good. What I learned through this process is that it isn't just in the crisis that Jesus is with us. It isn't just in the troubled times. It's in the foundation that he lays for us from the moment of our conception. And he doesn't just walk with us. He is the walk. He's the bricks on which we walk, the quicksand that we might be walking on sometimes. He's in the air that we breathe when we walk. He is the smile of a stranger and a helping hand. And he has poured himself out into everything and everyone around us to provide us with the support and the love that we need, not just to get through life, but to do it joyfully and with grace. We're not always successful. I'm not always successful at this, but I know I have the tools because that is what God has given me. And we do this as we wait for that ultimate life in heaven with Jesus and his Father. And we know that he uses us as the foundation for others along the walk as well. On Monday night, Barb Eckert told us a story of the man she met on an airplane who told her he just doesn't see God anymore. How heartbreaking. But God put Barb there in that moment to help him see that face again. Now, what he does with that, none of us can know. If that makes a difference in his world, we will never know the answer. But Jesus was there, and Jesus was walking with him in the presence of Barb Eckert that night. On Tuesday, we heard from Father Pete Henrio and Father Jean Delmore as they spoke to us about the power of reconciliation and what a gift that is for us. That Jesus also walks with us in our failings. Even when we're mucking it all up and making all the wrong decisions, Jesus is still right there with us. On Wednesday and Thursday, Father Tom Lamana and Father John Fuchs shared with us the power of the incarnation and the story of Jesus' life, reminding us that Jesus made this choice to be with us, to be human, so that we could know, so that he could know what it was to be human, so that he could then be more compassionate and more in love with us, even than he already was. So as we wrap up this week of encountering Jesus through all of creation, let's turn to the stations and walk that final walk with him as he does with us every single day. We invite you to follow along in your red books tonight, and we thank the Knights of Columbus for leading us in prayer. Thank you.